I guess the fundamental difference between these two things is one of them is an external, impersonal approach, and one of them is a totally holistic, personal approach. I am conscious, therefore I am personal, I have some sort of personality. You are conscious, therefore you have some sort of personality. Let's go from there.
I'm here with Griffyn Hancock, one of our new young friends. In our last video, we were talking about God, what is the origin of humankind. And I was born and raised, as many of you know, within the Vaishnava, Gaudiya Vaishnava, or Krishna consciousness, Bhakti tradition. So I've lived a very kind of sheltered and had a very in-house experience. So I'm not so familiar with what the rest of the world thinks about things. And I'd love to hear from Griffyn. He's coming from a very different background, raised in a, average Australian culture. And he's also quite scientifically minded. So it would be great to get some perspective on these things and see how we can relate them or see what is the Vedic response to them. So maybe you can start off by telling us what are the main, modern scientific theories of the day in regards to the origin of everything, life, existence.
Well, probably the most common scientific idea ever, probably the most discussed scientific, probably one of the most discussed ideas in the Western world is the notion of the Big Bang Theory, that due to some random chance, there was some event that created an extraordinarily large amount of energy, and that energy then expanded out into particles and planets and life, and eventually conscious beings. Much more modern theory is this sort of like computational, computation-based theory, the simulation theory, whatever you want to call it. It's the notion that everything can be boiled down to pure abstract information, and that every single physical event occurs as some sort of computation of that information, which would lead to a universe where higher and higher states of complexity is baked into its very fabric. Is that it'd be constantly trying to produce systems of higher and higher and higher complexity. So in that kind of universe, then a conscious entity like a human who is highly creative, who's very dynamic and all these kinds of things, that would be almost the goal of that kind of system. So it's also a bit of an anthrocentric theory in the way that it's very much.
What does anthrocentric mean?
As in, like, it's from a human perspective. Okay. It's a very human idea, especially because we don't see computers anywhere else apart from on Earth. We haven't found any computers anywhere else. It's essentially the idea that any experience that you could have might be part of a simulation of some higher entity.
Is this related something to the Matrix? This popular movie? Or is that totally different?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. That's probably where it got most of its popularity, because that's the whole idea. But the thing with the Matrix is that there is a real world. Like there's this duality between the mundane world, this computer generated world, and then there's like this real world that's like this grungy, dark, apocalyptic thing. Which is sort of like one of the main things about that movie. But then I think Neo in the third movie ended up being able to control the real world too, which implies that real world was also part of the Matrix. So that's, but you can have simulations within simulations and this kind of thing. So why not? But yeah, that's definitely where it got its first like big debut into the Western zeitgeist. It's a good movie too.
And you've mentioned that this theory is especially popular with young persons. Why do you think that is? And you're 19, right?
Yeah.
So like your generation, and
to some extent.
Why do you think there's so much appeal to this idea, to the your
to
generation?
the kids these days. Probably because most people who live on the internet feel this deep sense of existential dread. That
I love that. Existential dread. That is wonderful.
This it became a meme. Like 12-year-olds were sharing memes about, like, there'd be a dog with like wide eyes being like, "Ooh," and then just like in brackets just as like a caption, just existential dread.
Really? I feel very old.
It's like one of the main topics of Rick and Morty. Like Adventure Time, like Adventure Time had a sub series about it. Like it's this whole
I
thing of
don't know any of these things, by the way.
yeah, people sort of just have this deep fear of, what if all of my experiences are not true? Like, what if they're not real? What if they could just end randomly? If the whole universe could be created from a random event of extremely low probability, why could it not be withdrawn but from a random event of extremely low probability? And yeah, like then there's the question that, like, there was this viral video by Vsauce. If anybody remembers Vsauce, I don't know if he's still doing stuff. Hey, Michael here. But yeah, there was like this really popular video of like is my red the same red as your red? Like, if we were both looking at a strawberry and I could see through your perspective, would I call that color green? Like this idea of, like, your visual perception is your visual perception consistent with other people's visual perception? Is my red your red? Like, that was a huge debate. Like, now everybody and their dog says that to each other. It's just one of those things that people blurt out randomly. But it brings out this extraordinarily terrifying question of, what if every single thing I've experienced has nothing to do with every single thing you've experienced? Like, what if from my perspective, you're a person with an eyes, nose, mouth, ears, that kind of thing. Your skin's orange, like your skin's orangey pink. You're wearing a pink sari, but then from your perspective, like, it's just wiggly lines. Like how different are other people's perspectives? And then if everybody's perspective is different, if every single living thing's perspective is different, if there's just this like clusterfuck of like parallel chaos going on at any one moment, what the hell is the meaning of life? Because the way that people approach the scientific method leaves these gigantic questions open, and they're explored through art usually more than science. But yeah, that's a terrible question to come up with, like, to come up against when you're like, 14. Like, oh, what if everything I've experienced may not be real, and what if everything everybody else experiences is totally different from everything I experience? That puts you in this like, it puts you in existential isolation. Like, existential is a very good word for this kind of thing, but like, it puts you in a horrific feeling of incredible isolation and fear of what if none of this is real? What if I'm completely unable to interpret my environment and I'm interpreting everything just completely incorrectly? All these kinds of things. And there's no answer for that at all. Absolutely no answer for that within the Western scientific conception. Like, they just keep probing and probing and probing further into these really deeply uncomfortable questions. But there's nobody there to answer them. They just keep stacking up over time. Like, every single time a new episode of Rick and Morty is released and Dan Harmon thinks of some clever thing, then it just adds to this like sinking feeling in everybody's stomach.
So you've mentioned the Big Bang Theory, you've mentioned simulation theory. There's another popular one is string theory.
Yeah. So string theory is more of a new agey thing. It's the idea that everything in existence empirically boils down to vibrational modes of some fundamental object that is this 10-dimensional loop, this 10-dimensional string, or an 11-dimensional membrane folded into folded into a circle. That there's this
Sounds
universal.
very complicated.
is probably the most complicated system of thought that has ever been invented. It's actually a cluster of theories. It's 8 clusters of theories that all have their own, like, many teams of researchers behind them that seem to coalesce into something they call M theory. But nobody knows how it fits together, and the maths behind it is extraordinarily complex and cannot be agreed on, and is all dealing with stuff that your intellect can almost not grasp at all. So it's like, yeah, it's definitely down in the deep end. In essence, it's the proposition that rather than there being all these different fundamental particles, like the normal nuclear standard model, that actually there's one fundamental particle, and through the different vibrational modes, it manifests as different things. Sort of like how, like, you can have a cup with cold water in it or with hot water in it. The difference between the feeling of hot and cold, empirically, is mechanical vibration. It's the atom is wiggling when it's hot, and it's not wiggling so much when it's cold. So it's the same thing. It's just there's a different vibration to it, and when you touch it, it feels different. Like, it actually gives you a totally different experience. So, yeah, the idea that everything is actually harmonically based is actually based on resonance and based on vibration, which is quite profound. But it's not. It's more of something that's a mystic exploration. Like, it's more useful to me as a mystic exploration, as something that you sort of intuitively explore, rather than go, I want to learn about string theory. Let me see the maths behind string theory, because then your brain will just turn into a brick.
So you've clearly spent a lot of time, despite your young years. You're only 19. You have quite an in-depth knowledge on these subject matters. I know it's difficult for you to condense this into a few minutes explanation. So tell us, like, how did someone with such a scientific mind come to subscribe to the Vedic version of things? How did you begin to feel the deficiencies of these concepts and to see the superiority of what's given in the Vedas?
I was dealing with all these ideas in my head, and I was, thinking, like, how do you think about the multiverse? What is the nature of reality? Other higher dimensional spaces encoded within this lower dimensional space. All this, all the kind of stuff that you end up bumping into if you are exploring modern ideas, or if you're watching popular cartoons. And then I was talking to a devotee who I didn't know was a devotee at the time, named Nava Sundar. And he sort of like, he had heard these spiels over and over again. And so he sort of just stopped me one time, and he said something along the lines of, like, there's stories that in the tradition that I'm in, there's stories that we tell to children that at first have this surface level meaning, and then over time, as they unfold within that person, then they give higher and higher degrees of revelation. That it's sort of not just like the, in Western culture, you pick up things like sweets. You're just eating popcorn, like, you're scrolling through Facebook, and it's just like you're eating little bits of popcorn. They give you a tiny amount of enjoyment for maybe 15 seconds, and then you turn around, you can throw some popcorn into someone else's mouth, and then you're like, oh, that was fun. And you're like, I'm bored now. But yeah, he's saying that actually this tradition, you're planting seeds in a person, and that they're growing into higher and higher magnitudes of revelation across their life. And it's something that's accessible from all levels, even if you're just a child, it's still appealing to you. So I thought, oh, that's pretty interesting. And that's just the first sentence that he said. And then the next thing he said was, I can't remember exactly how he said it, but he was talking about how Mahavishnu is lying in the causal ocean, and as he breathes out, infinite universes come out of his pores like golden eggs. And then as he breathes back in, those universes are dissoluted again. And he's eternally breathing like this, and there's this continuous evolution and dissolution on a multiversal scale. And I don't think he told me anything after that. I think he's very good at just saying something and then just leaving you to think about it and not overloading you. So he pretty much just left it with that, and then went to go, he's a householder, so he went to go deal with his own duties. And I just became totally obsessed with that, because I had been trying to figure out these things at really high, like large scales in my tiny skull-sized kingdom. And then he had given me this thing that was something so easily understandable, but so extraordinarily profound. I went, wow, I've never heard of an ancient tradition that has any sort of grasp over the multiverse at all. I've never ever heard of any group of people who can explain the multiverse. Not the Buddha. Like I had heard some things about multiple different types of Buddhism. Of course, there's all the different scientific conceptions. There's Christianity. I had heard nothing about Hinduism at that point, and the Greeks and all these different philosophical or theosophical traditions. If you say, are there other universes? They could just say probably yes, either yes or probably, and you're like, what are they like? I don't know. Where do they come from? I don't know. Wherever this one came from. But then there's this extraordinarily vivid and personal picture of the origin of our universe, and not just the origin of our universe, but the origin of all universes, and this sort of cyclic dissolution and evolution. And it was just like, it's something that illuminates everything. This was the first time I came in contact with something that was genuinely effulgent. Not just something that people said it was. Because I'd been to these psychedelic festivals, these doofs and this kind of thing. It had some really profound discussions with people and profound experiences. But they were insular in the way of people could be like, yeah, man, like everything's like vibration, and like you just gotta get to a higher level of like harmonic resonance, bro. And so I'd be like, that's pretty cool, but it doesn't really mean anything. It has very little ontology behind it. It's just a nice fact. Like, you upgraded from a piece of popcorn to maybe like, I don't know, like a piece of popcorn with sugar on it. But yeah, this whole Mahavishnu thing, it just like totally took me over. And then he gave me the subject of evolution of consciousness, which then just wiped away everything. just very clearly established the superiority of all Vedic thought.
Who is, for those who don't have so much familiarity with our tradition, who is Mahavishnu?
He's a manifestation of God, who's lying in this causal ocean, this sphere of action, where there's actions and reactions. It's not necessarily a totally eternal part of the infinite cosmology. And he's responsible for the creation and dissolution of universes. He's lying in this ocean of causality, half asleep. And as he's half asleep and in this divine rest, then just through the gentle motion of his breathing, infinite universes are manifest and then unmanifest afterwards. That's the best explanation I can give. So yeah, he's essentially a fractional expansion of the infinite personality of God. Sort of like how in the same way, if you have a Mandelbrot set, you can take a point of that Mandelbrot set and it expands into an infinite Julia set.
What's a Mandelbrot set?
It's a fractal. But then what's a fractal? It's a...
Okay, let's just end that right there. So that's wonderful to hear about your initial attraction. Tell us something about, consciousness, God, how does... in a condensed way, I mean, like how you saw the superiority of the theistic approach to understanding the nature of existence rather than the atheistic approach, which you'd previously been schooled in and were studying very deeply.
Well, I think the best way I can relate it is to my previous statement, where I had never encountered anything like what the Vedic version had given me, what the Vedic tradition had given me, that it was genuinely effulgent. It was something that showed through Like it was evident to my very self, not just to my mind or to my intellect or to my senses. It's something that holistically was able to give me some sort of truth and some way of navigating the world, because it's what I like. You know, it's what everybody's looking for. Everybody's looking for a way of navigating the world. Like, you know, we don't just want keyboard shortcuts that take us to different places very quickly without any explanation. We want a real ontological understanding of how everything relates to everything else and the exact underlying structure of reality. That's what everybody's looking for. That's why anybody does anything. It's because they're looking for some sort of they're looking for some sort of way to navigate the subjective experience. And of course, there's been this science developed for 1,500 years for navigating the objective experience, but the Vedas is actually a science of navigating the subjective experience. It's totally the opposite. In Gaudiya Vaishnavism, at least, it's totally the opposite of empiric soirees that I had seen previously, because any conversation that I saw of other scientists, any conversation that I saw between other Western intellectuals was always deeply entangling. Like they were going further and further and further and further and further into one concept. It's like you require more and more and more and more brain power to keep going, to very quickly diminishing returns. And then whatever you deeply explore, like, you know, let's say I know everything about string theory, but then, like, you know, how do you be a nice person? Like, who cares if you know everything about string theory? If you can't form relationships with other people, then all the knowledge you have actually is experientially useless. So then
all has its value up here.
It's totally illusory value. It's worse than Bitcoin. It has less value than Bitcoin. Rather than, you know, of course, in the Western atheistic tradition, you get things that are ideas that are extraordinarily isolated and abstract and have nothing to do with your everyday experience. I was getting this impression that the further I went into empiric knowledge, the more detached I was from the essence of what I was seeking. I was more detached from myself and from other people. That I was entering into a world of some form of, though in one respect it seemed like you know, higher consciousness, higher knowledge, but on another respect, when you compare it to your everyday life, it's actually deepening forms of ignorance, is how I was sort of perceiving it. That I felt like I was getting more and more sick the further I was going into it. I guess the fundamental difference between these two things is one of them is an external, impersonal approach, and one of them is a totally holistic, personal approach. That the whole Vedic tradition is working off of personality first, and then going from there, saying, you know, I am conscious, therefore I am personal, I have some sort of personality. You are conscious, therefore you have some sort of personality. Let's go from there. Rather than just starting from whatever haphazard place that your mind has chosen. Really, we don't actually live in the objective world. We live in the subjective world. We're observers of the objective world. That's what makes it objective. But yeah, we are the subjective component. The objective world is external. Therefore, we don't live there. Because it's not part of us. It's just something we're looking at. It's like if you were looking at a piece of paper your whole life and getting like so like entranced in this piece of paper, and then somebody tapped you on the shoulder and was like, are you okay? Like, yeah. Pretty much we're all, like, everybody through any endeavor that they make is trying to find some sort of way of navigating the world. Like that's why it's so common for people to have this conversation of like, is the red I see the same as your red? Like, because, you know, it comes from this thing of like, you know, I need to find the nature of reality and I don't know how to talk about it. But maybe if we try and start this metaphysical conversation, then we can get somewhere. But the Vedas is just giving all of that just with like with an open palm. study of consciousness from the subjective perspective rather than from the objective perspective, but not whimsically, which is I in all of the different traditions I'd had some contact with, it was totally whimsical. To me, Buddhism felt whimsical, Christianity felt whimsical, modern science felt whimsical.
Vague. I think
vague, but also like it sort of just had this like, we'll do some stuff and yeah, that's good enough kind of thing going on. But then, this Vedic tradition from what I was reading from Srila Govinda Maharaj and Srila Sridhar Maharaj, and having some small contact with the disciples through Navasundar, I was realizing that this is a actual bona fide science of consciousness starting at the subjective perspective. Not that it's something that some people made up 1,000 years ago and now, if you don't stick to this, you're not part of the tradition. It's that there's always this seeking attitude, this sincere seeking attitude for as long as history can record. And that the level of realization in the Vedas is far, far, far beyond anything I'd ever seen. But it was not esoteric. That's the absolutely confounding thing, because you expect if there's something that's like this super high level revelatory truth that either you'll have to meditate for 1,000,000 years to get it, or you'll have to figure out some sort of code in your intelligence, or you'll have to just be like stumble upon a rock, kick the rock over, and then it has like the answer to everything on the bottom of it. Like, you're expecting this like gigantic revelation kind of thing that you have to either do a huge amount for or get it totally randomly. But yeah, all of it was common sense. Like it was common sense, but it wasn't just common sense in the way that I had experienced it in my background, which is just like, look, mate, don't drink too much grog. It's common sense. To, like, there are higher planes of reality. It's common sense. There's higher planes of reality than that. It's common sense. Everything starts as personal. It's common sense. God is a person. It's common sense. I'm a person. You're a person. So our source must also be personal, but not personal in an abstract way, like literally a person. Like, we have friendly interactions. Therefore, you must be able to have friendly interactions with your source. Like, it's this kind of like super easily accessible, totally open sweetness. That is that and the more I was learning about it, the more I was reading about it, the more I was able to interact normally with other people, the more I was able to interact normally with myself and my environment. Like, it's a totally different category of substance to anything that exists within this plane, I don't think. Of course, there's things that have little bits of it, like even Rick and Morty has little bits of truth in it. But within your life, you might pick up like 20 or 30 atoms of truth, but there was a whole ocean of it pouring constantly for free in a way that was immediately interpretable and just plain clear as day. This kind of thing, like you discover it and you're like it's like in Doctor Who. There's this reoccurring event where there'd be like a crack in the wall, and it'd be because of this like huge explosive event that just like ricocheted throughout all time and space, and like it was like totally white, and on the other side it's like, what's on the other side? It's like that kind of thing. It's like a hole in all of mundane reality, but not to some like explosion and not to some like horrible thing, but to the greatest thing you could ever imagine, better than anything you could ever imagine. It's like the most fantastic best case scenario that could ever be thought by anybody times 1,000,000. Like, yeah, totally inconceivable, but not inconceivable in the way of like like string theory. String theory is inconceivable. Like, I've read probably 25 papers on string theory. I don't know what it's about. Like, I almost don't understand it at all. I have a vague silhouette of what it's about. But the moment that you start being open to hearing truths from the Vedas, like, you're getting this deep realization, but it's almost like it's just for free. It's just being handed to you. It's rather than something that you have to work hard yourself, and I need to be powerful enough to eventually get this. I need to have the right armor set. I need to level up enough, or I need to cram enough crap into my brain. It's just that you need to be open to some sort of affection, and then it's given to you. It's an affectionate exchange rather than an objective exploitative exchange. And every single piece of it is totally effulgent, something that reveals not just the nature of some component of reality, but it reveals the nature of yourself, the nature of everyone else, the nature of your environment, and the nature of God at the same time. It's the highest form of mysticism, the highest form of science, it's the highest form of art, it's the highest form of architecture, it's the highest form of music, it's the highest form of poetry, it's the highest aesthetic, it's the highest form of relationship. Anything that you could conceive, anything that you like right now, it will be 100% fulfilled and more. It doesn't matter if the only thing you're interested in is architecture, or the only thing you're interested in is like children's cartoons or something. There will be some way that it will fully satisfy what you want right now, and then have you purified of that want, and then gives you something better to want.
Well, Griffyn, it's been really wonderful to speak with you. You speak with great intelligence and inspiration, and we hope we can continue hearing from you. I think you've given us a lot of food for thought, so we'll conclude here, and hopefully this will be the first of many, many things that we'll hear from Griffyn.
Ciao, Guru.